So 12:35, I'm now calling the meeting to order. First of all, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining today's first online MAP General Membership Meeting. I'm Maria RONSON, your MC and moderator for today's MAP GMM on leading through COVID-19. I hope you're all settled down comfortably because we'll now begin our program. We start with an invocation. May I request everyone to pause and bow our heads for a short prayer. For all who have contracted coronavirus, we pray for care and healing. For those who are particularly vulnerable, we pray for safety and protection. For all who experience fear or anxiety, we pray for peace of mind and spirit. For affected families who are facing difficult decisions between food on the table or public safety, pray for policies that recognize their plight. For those who do not have adequate health insurance, we pray that no family will face financial burdens alone. For those who are, for our brothers and sisters around the world, we pray for shared solidarity. For public officials and decision makers, we pray for wisdom and guidance. Father, during this time, may your church be a sign of hope, comfort, and love to all. Grant peace, grant comfort, grant healing. Be with us, Lord. Let us pause for a moment to pray for the eternal repose of the following MAP members. Mr. Mayo Jose Mayo Biong Cinco MNSA, former advisor to the board of First Metro Investment Corporation, who passed away on April 3 at the age of 68. Dr. Alan T. Ortiz, former MAP governor and former president and COO of SMC Global Power Holdings Corporation, who passed away on March 23 at the age of 66. Mr. Roland Ron Valdueza, former CFO of ABS-CBN Corporation, who passed away on March 30 at the age of 60. Let us now place our right hand on our chest and join us in singing the Philippine National Anthem. So let me welcome you all once again. I'd like to say that about 260 people signed up for this session, which is wonderful. And it is according to Arnold, one of the largest attendance. We averaged about 214 last year. And that included non-members and members of the media. But this time, all 260 are members, and only 10 to 15 are members of press or media. Anyway, and on this note, let me introduce to you the president of MAP, who is the senior partner and ex-com member of Aqua Law, attorney Francis Lim, to deliver the welcome remarks.
Families are all safe and healthy while we are here on an extended lockdown. On behalf of the MAP Board of Governors, let me extend a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you especially to our speaker, Mr. TULLY MOSS, and our actors, Mr. FETALINO, Mr. Lee, Mr. Arthur Tan, and NESTOR V. Let us all learn from the experiences and insights to help us and our businesses address the problems caused by COVID-19. Many thanks to MAP Communications Committee Chair and past MAP Governor Carol Dominguez and the MAP Secretariat led by Arnold for helping us put together this first online GMM which deals on the topic leading through COVID-19. Many thanks to you, Maria, our member and our formerly of the Associated Press, for agreeing to be our Master of Ceremonies and moderator for today's session. May I start by assuring you, ladies and gentlemen, that your organization is not only making public statements. Your board and several committees, especially the National Issues Committee, led by past President Marisa Mandarin and Governor Sai Tetanco, are hard at work contributing in our own little way, in every way possible, to help our members and the country address the problems brought about by this pandemic. By way of updating the membership, on April 2, we had our very successful first MAP webinar on responding to COVID-19 with an attendance of 211 participants. Thanks very much to Committee Chair, to the MAP Trade, Investments and Tourism Committee, chaired by Charlie Villaseñor, with Marivic Españo as the Governor in charge, for spearheading that very first MAP webinar under the MAP CEO Academy. Thanks to our speakers, led by MAP past President Joey Bermudez, who participated all the way from Toronto, Canada, for their insights on how they're dealing with the situation. I've also requested our MAP Management Development and Human Capital Committee, chaired by Rico de Guzman, with JP Orbeta as Governor in charge, to organize the second MAP webinar on the topic Managing Employee Compensation Amidst COVID-19. There are a host of questions from our members, and I'm sure you will learn a lot from it. Encourage the members to attend the session, and we will give notice on when exactly it will take place. Our future webinars will tackle other relevant issues of the times, like preparing the workforce for the new normal after the lockdown. As you know, we have also created a MAP community for COVID-19 Viber group. As of today, we already have 533 MAP members on board. We are indeed impressed by the response, and we hope that our members will use that platform in sharing their insights and recommendations. A friendly reminder though, please do your fact checks before sending anything. Always think before you click. We are being guided by your suggestions in our interaction with the government and other business groups on the COVID situation. Earlier, we have also created a Google Drive containing government issuances and circulars and other pertinent information about COVID-19, which MAP members can freely access anytime. Please keep yourselves updated. As your president, I've been representing MAP in meetings with other business groups and conglomerates in an effort to give inputs to the IATF for consideration. Among these were on the issue of whether to lift the lockdown after its original period on April 12. In one of the meetings that I attended, I articulated MAP's position that before lifting the lockdown, we have to get a better grip on the real situation of infection on the ground and get the health care system better prepared in case there is recurrence resulting from the lifting of the ECQ. We all now know that the president extended the lockdown. Testing is being accelerated and our health system is being prepared. The burning issue now is whether to do away with the Luzon-wide lockdown and shift to an LGU-based lockdown, and under what circumstances and conditions should it happen. In one of the meetings, we raised the possibility of conducting tests at the barangay level, and plans are now underway to do it. Central to the resolution of the issue is what kind of mass testing should be put in place. Should we limit ourselves to the PCR tests or adopt the antibody rapid test or a combination thereof? There seems to be an emerging consensus that conducting antibody rapid tests should be adopted to help determine whether the lockdown should be lifted. It was also suggested that companies should adopt it to help them determine who among their employees will be allowed to return to and remain at work. At yesterday's board meeting, your board has decided to conduct a webinar on the test so that our members will better understand them. The Bayanihan Act, which is principally a social amelioration program, is now in place. We were involved, together with other business groups and in my capacity as a lawyer, by way of giving inputs for the law. Some of you may recall that there was a takeover provision of private enterprise, which we, together with the other business groups, opposed. Our voices were heard, and the provision was substantially toned down. Likewise, may I also mention that your board has approved a partnership with PASHA in providing assistance to the government and addressing the current problems in the area of supply chain management. We have been in discussion with PASHA on the details of the project and have formed a core group to work on it. Just yesterday, your board approved a modified transport plan prepared by the Committee on Traffic, Transportation, and Infrastructure in response to problems aired by our frontliners on our transport system during the ECQ. I have asked Committee Chairman Rui Moreno to expand the plan to address transportation needs in the event that there is a partial lifting of ECQ after April 30 before submitting the plan to the IATF. It is also worth mentioning that your organization has donated 1 million pesos to the PGH Medical Foundation to help in the acquisition of personal protective equipment, or PPEs, for our medical frontliners. Likewise, your organization donated another 1 million pesos to the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, or PDRF, for its project of Nayan to feed our less fortunate brothers and sisters. We encourage our members to contribute to this project, and in response, the Far Eastern University donated 1 million pesos, and the Shareholders Association donated 250 pesos by way of donation. Thank you, VP Gigi Montinola, Fred Parungaw, and Chair Evelyn Singson of Sharefield. We sincerely apologize for not being able to accommodate all requests for donations, especially from our members, because our financial resources have to be managed. You are now reading about a stimulus package, a fiscal measure which we, together with other business groups, have proposed early on, even before the Bayanihan Act was approved in Congress. We have been quietly working on this matter. Congresswoman Stella Kimbo has a draft bill, and we circulated it to the COVID-19 Viber group for comments. We already started receiving comments and suggestions. We expect another version to be filed by Congressman Joey Salceta, which we will also circulate to the members for comments and suggestions. We extensively discussed this stimulus package at yesterday's online board meeting, and there were brilliant inputs from some of our governors. Your board has requested me and Governor Tatanco to be actively involved. We will continue to update the MAP membership on what MAP is doing and will be doing in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Please do not forget to regularly refer to the MAP memo, which is our weekly electronic newsletter for regular updates on MAP activities. Our members, let us all continue praying and let's work harder as one family with the rest of the nation to help our country win this war against COVID-19. In closing, stay safe, keep fit, and healthy, everyone. Thank you. Mabuhay ang MAP.
Okay, thank you very much, Francis. So before we begin the session, let me just give you a few reminders and some kind of house rules. Please remember to mute your speakers to block off the background noise. Members of the MAP Secretariat who are also with us will do this during the online meeting in case you forget to press the mute button. Remember also to turn off your camera or video for better audio quality. Given the limited time that we have, we apologize that we cannot entertain direct verbal questions from the participant. Please submit your questions through the Q&A button that you see in your screen. With the assistance of MAP Secretariat and also my partner for today, Carol Dominguez, I will read questions on your behalf. Use the chat button to reach out to your fellow members who are attending this online GMM. And for your information, you will only be able to see the speakers and their presentations, and you will not be able to view the other members of the audience. And lastly, at any point during this online meeting, in case you lose connection, just click on the link that was given to you earlier by the MAP Secretariat, and you will be able to join in again. And now, let's start our session by introducing to you Mr. Tully Moss, who has had decades of experience as a management consultant. He has also been living in the Philippines for the past 7 years. But more importantly, Tully has an interesting tale. He's still living in the Philippines, but was caught in the middle of the coronavirus crisis while he was in Osaka and Seoul. And so he decided to return to the US, where he is at the moment, almost past midnight, to join us and share with us his insights on the COVID crisis. The floor is yours, Tully.
Thank you very much, Maria, and a good morning to all of you. And let's see if we can get this technology working. And Maria, let me know if you see my screen now.
Yes, we are seeing your slide.
Okay, that's good. I'll wipe a bead of sweat off my brow then. I just want to let you all know that although I may be here in the Boston area, I still think of you. This is a photograph that I took from my unit in Rockwell. And the people in Rockwell are doing a very good job of keeping people in the community informed of what's going on there. And, you know, the more than 20 people among the various Rockwell units there who have been infected with the coronavirus, unfortunately, and 3 of them have passed away, including one in Rockwell where I live. So, you know, with that kind of news, believe me, I continue to think about all of you, even though I'm here in the U.S. Also, just to let you know that that the news of the Philippines reaches us here in other parts of the world. There was a wonderful moment there on Good Morning Britain, where Piers Morgan lauded Filipino nurses working in the UK. There are about 21,000 Filipino nurses working at the National Health Service in the UK and the private hospitals there. And just to let you know that their service is much appreciated outside of the Philippines, as well as the service of the nurses and physicians there in the Philippines itself. Also to let you know that, you know, news has reached us that Ambassador Catala, the Philippine ambassador to Lebanon, passed away due to the coronavirus, as did Dr. Baera, a premier cynologist at UP. So we're sorry to hear about that, but again, just letting you know that you're in our thoughts and prayers here in other parts of the world. Okay, we're here to talk about leadership during the coronavirus, the COVID-19 crisis. And what you see on this screen here is that the intensity of that crisis is currently most heavily in the United States and Italy, and that it's has been mainly in the northern China, northern hemisphere, basically Western Europe, North America. One thing to note is how light it is in Africa, and that it's not been as heavy in Latin America. But if it does start to spread widely in those parts of the world, there could be big issues because the healthcare systems there are not as advanced as they are in other parts of the world. This is a challenge like many of us have never seen before. Its circumstances are taking us well beyond where we've been previously, our knowledge and our capabilities. If you're like me, there are times when you feel like your brain is about to explode with all the information that's been coming to us, but it's hard to know sometimes what is correct and what is not. We have competing priorities. The top priority obviously has to be to keep as many people healthy as we possibly can, but this is creating severe strains on economies around the world. It's a highly dynamic situation. That quote, "It changes by the minute," comes from a senior Singapore official that we interviewed prior to the development of the presentation we're giving there. So even those who have shown exceptional ability to deal with the crisis, as they have in Singapore, even they are finding that this is an incredibly dynamic situation. And the challenge is the endpoint is not at all clear, at least not yet. I think pictures are emerging, and I'm going to bring you that picture this morning, but we don't have a clear endpoint as yet. And the very high uncertainty, very high stakes given all of this. So our decisions have to be made under tremendous stress, and they have to be made in real time. Just so that you know that you're not alone in this, the kinds of challenges and reactions that just put on the screen are being shared universally. I have attended probably more webinars than I care to think about, but those are pretty common expressions of the challenges that are confronting everybody in this crisis. In terms of leadership, our challenges are, my goodness, what do we do when no one seems to know what to do? What do we do in a situation that has the kind of complexity that this one does? And what do we do when things are moving as fast as they have been moving? How do we figure this thing out in real time under tremendous stress? It's our new normal for the time being, temporary, but at this juncture, an indefinite period. So that's a considerable challenge that confronts us. How are we going to get through this? I'm going to talk a bit about leadership qualities that should help you get through it. Something about the decision-making process, which is a little different than it typically than it is during normal times. The importance of teams and the composition of those teams, a bit about how we need to communicate during this crisis, and then finally, the very fundamental importance of values during this whole crisis. You know, when I thought about, leadership, and what kinds of leaders have experienced situations that are as chaotic, complex, and dangerous in a lot of ways as what we're confronting? One certainly is soldiers in battle. And if you speak with people who have actually been in battle, what they say is it's just chaotic, completely chaotic. It's very difficult to know what to do. So I'm going to draw a bit on the experience of military individuals for how to lead through this crisis. And then at the opposite end of some spectrum there, you see young people in a startup. And there are good things that we can learn from startups in this situation, because part of what's called for is being innovative, being creative about how we get through this situation, because it's one that we've not confronted before. And that's the very nature of startups, is finding a creative way to deal with something when you don't know the answer. You're peering a bit into the darkness, but you you find a way, you find a way. So let's see what we can learn from these people. I'm going to start with Admiral Jim Stockdale. He was in the US Navy during the American War in Vietnam. His plane was shot down. He was a prisoner of war for over 7 years. During that time, he was subjected to tremendous torture. They broke his leg twice. He was beaten mercilessly, but he came through, and he was the senior Navy official in the prisoner of war prison there in Vietnam. So he had a responsibility for the other naval individuals there. And how did he come through it? And it was twofold. One, he said you need to be brutally honest about the circumstances, that false hope is detrimental. He was asked, well, you got through it and you got through this horrible experience. What about the ones who didn't? What was going on with them? He said, oh, that's easy. They were the optimists. They were the ones who thought, well, you know, we'll be out by Easter, and then Easter would come and go, and then, oh, we'll be out by Christmas. Christmas would come and go, and so forth and so on. He said they died of a broken heart. So it's not helpful to have false hopes. At the same time, he said you have to combine this brutal honesty with a rational basis for hope. You know, you can never lose faith that you will prevail in the end. And these principles are going to guide what I'm going to tell you in this presentation. I definitely believe there's hope for the Philippines. I think if the Philippines plays its cards right, it will come out of this situation perhaps better than many people think it will now. But at the same time, I'm going to be delivering messages that you know, maybe are not what everybody wants to hear, but I think that combination of brutal honesty and a basis for hope hopefully will help people chart the way forward. Throughout this crisis, your biggest assets as leaders are obviously your health, but also your mindset, the way your mindset for how you approach this. So basically don't panic. At the same time, don't tell yourself fairy tales. If possible, develop the ability to zoom in and out. The tendency is to want to zoom into the details and just get lost in the details. But you also need ability to zoom out, because there are going to be opportunities that come from many companies through this. And if you have an ability to step back and look at an overall picture and then think creatively about it, you can find opportunities for your company and for the Philippines. Obviously, you need to take care of your physical well-being. And again, just to kind of cheer people along, you're going to get through this. We are all going to get through this. Let's talk a little bit about leadership principles that we can learn from startups. And if we start at the top of that daisy wheel, the green circles there on the left with the goal, I have taught innovation any number of times. I teach the importance of being very clear about your goal. People tend to look at me kind of glassy-eyed, like, Tully, what are you talking about? Is this business 101 or whatever? And then they proceed right away to step right out and do things that show that a goal hasn't been well thought of. One of our panelists is Artan. He's with IMI and Ayala Corporation. My understanding is Ayala actually stepped back and gave some thought to what their goal would be through this crisis, and that one conclusion was that the ecosystem had to be supported. It couldn't just be about the Ayala companies themselves, that the ecosystem, suppliers and so forth that Ayala companies depended on had to be supported. In terms of the kinds of people, I'm going to talk a little bit about in a minute about what the nature of those people. One thing to bear in mind is maybe to think about having a few of those young people on task forces that you may have to deal with this crisis, because they've got energy, they've got a fearlessness, and many times they have a very fresh perspective on what is possible. And I'll talk a little bit about processes also. And then very importantly from the startups, what we can learn is doing a lot with not very much. Startups typically don't have much money. Cash is going to be an issue for a number of companies. And if we can find inspiration from these startups for how to do more with less, that will benefit all of us. I'm going to talk a bit more about cash flow as we go forward here, but obviously during this, if the end is not very clear at this point, we have to be hyper efficient about how we use cash. We also need to be discovery oriented. Normal times is more about being efficiency oriented, et cetera. And, but in this period here, particularly if we're looking for creative solutions, we need to be discovery oriented. This is all a part of stepping back, that zooming out here, engaging in clean sheet thinking, because as much as we would like for things to return to normal, say in 2 weeks, maybe they will, maybe they won't. Maybe there'll be some changes to industries, to markets, et cetera, going forward. And it can be helpful to think very clearly about where we want to go, even several years out. As long as you're not in just complete survival mode, you can take a bit of time to think, hey, where is everything possibly going to be? Where do we want to be in 5 years? You might be surprised at the kind of creative solutions you come up with, and then very much be willing to experiment. That's at the heart of innovation, willing to experiment, willing to take a few risks to see if a creative solution can be developed. And then finally, this is really a theme for all of us throughout this crisis, is to put a premium on learning. Things could have been done better by many parties in this crisis. And if we can put a premium on learning and continually building on that learning, we'll all be in a lot better shape. In terms of a team, many of you probably already have incident management teams. If you've not, here are a few thoughts. A team that's going to oversee all aspects of the situation, not just financial, say, but medical, logistical, et cetera. It would be helpful also to understand charge that team with understanding evolving issues, rather than always looking for an immediate answer, reframing issues as questions, as decisions to get the dialogue going, have a deliberative style, deliberate about key questions and decisions, and then delegate problem solving for specific issues to other groups. Here are some, is an example of the kind of groups that and teams that one might have to address this crisis. If we look on the left here, we have a response leadership team, and on the right, the action teams. We could do webinars about virtually every one of the circles, but they're particularly on the right. I'll talk a little bit in this session about the financial side and external communications, but certainly, particularly if you're in manufacturing, things like supply chain and so forth are of critical importance. For this team, particularly where it is entering areas that have not been entered before, it can be advisable to set reasonable expectations. And part of the way you do that is by holding candid discussions, and ones where there's psychological safety, meaning it's okay, people feel free to bring issues up that may be uncomfortable for some parties there. They don't feel like they'll be shot down or penalized for them, where there's a feeling of joint inquiry. We're all in this together, rather than advocating a given position. Expecting best efforts, maybe not perfection, when we're in an area that is very new to us. An emphasis, as I keep saying, on rapid learning, and just an acknowledgement that not everything we will try will work, but that we're going to keep working on it until it does. And particularly in this kind of environment, the great leaders are the ones who are great learners. There was a webinar with Harvard Business School alumni held just a few days ago, and during that webinar, the participants were invited to chat in names of individuals that they thought were leading effectively in this in this crisis. And what you see on the screen are the ones who got the most votes. It was an international set, but presumably a fair number of Americans, because in the upper left, the largest picture there is of Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York. Moving clockwise, upper right is Gavin Newsom, governor of California. Down from him, obviously, is Bill Gates. Below him, Anthony Fauci, director of the US National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Queen Elizabeth, who gave just a sterling talk to the people of the United Kingdom recently. And then Jacinda Ardern, Prime Minister of New Zealand. Well, there is hope. I promise you that would be part of my message this morning. We're all in this together. And I want to commend Maria for her invocation where she prayed for solidarity. We indeed are all in this together. Collectively, there's a huge reservoir of creativity and ingenuity. I know it's there within the Philippines and it's there internationally. Acting together, we indeed are going to figure this out and we're going to get through this. All right, that's the leadership side. Let's talk a little bit about the medical situation. If you look at this chart, if you look at the vertical axis, this is excess number of deaths. And this is a public response in days. And you can see clearly that the higher number of deaths here in the upper part of this chart came about primarily because of there was a slow response time in terms of the public health response. Now these data all relate to the last time we had a global pandemic of this kind of magnitude. That was 1918, 1919. Have we learned our lesson? Maybe not so much. The basic message is faster public health response times equal lower mortality rates. In China and the US and other countries, not all countries, but a number of them initially ignored this learning. We could definitely do better than we've done. We should have learned our lesson 100 years ago. And going forward, all of us need to learn from this pandemic and perform much better in the future. Bill Gates gave a TED Talk in 2015. This was his slide from there. We are not ready for the next epidemic. It was given 5 years ago. In the center there, you'll see a map of Africa with a red dot. This related, he was talking at the time of the Ebola crisis. And he was, believe it or not, the corona nature of the virus has been known for some time, although the one we're currently confronting, the coronavirus was not known at that time. But he was basically saying, you know, we're not ready and it could be a really big deal. He was estimating then it could cost the world $3 trillion. I think we're going to go well above that with our COVID-19 crisis. For anyone who still thinks that maybe the coronavirus isn't that different from the flu, they really need to take a look at this chart. Basically on the upper right there, you see the death rate, which is 1%. 1 out of 100 people have been dying from this coronavirus. The data are from South Korea, which probably may have the best data worldwide. They did such extensive testing that it maybe is the most reliable data out there. And if you look at it, the average mortality rate for the flu down here in the blue in the bottom here, compared with what we have now, this coronavirus has a death rate that's basically 10 times what the flu typically is. So this clearly needs to be taken very seriously. You know, at the same time, going back to Bill Gates' basic message, you know, that 1% death rate means 99% of people are surviving. If we've got this kind of a crisis, where 99% of those infected are surviving, I hate to think what it might be if that death rate were much higher. So again, going back to that, we all need to learn our lessons from this so that we should, God forbid, something like this happen in the future, we're much, much better prepared. And we get on top of it much more quickly than we have in this particular situation. Just to give you a little bit about my personal journey, as Maria noted, I was in Seoul, South Korea. I was there on February 25th. You see me there with the mask on, and as I walked the streets of Seoul, South Korea, it was clear that about 90% of the people on the street were wearing masks. And as I walked the streets, there were posters everywhere about what you should do to prevent getting ill, washing the hands, and going to a medical clinic if you have a fever, that kind of thing. But it was everywhere, electronic signboards, billboards, just messages everywhere. Sanitizer dispensers were placed in virtually every building. Temperature taken before you could get into hotels, etc. It was obvious to me that South Korea was taking this very, very seriously. I was impressed with how they were doing it. Fast forward 2 days, February 27th, I flew to the United States. My port of entry was San Francisco. And that was an interesting experience. When I went through San Francisco, did I see any posters about coronavirus similar to the ones I'd seen in Seoul, South Korea? No. When the immigration officer talked to me, did he ask me if, was my temperature taken? Not at all. Did the immigration officer ask me if I had been near the part of South Korea where the infections were spiking? No. Did I get any kind of warning that if I had a fever or whatever, I should go see a physician? Nothing. The one question I got from the immigration officer was, did I buy anything in South Korea? It's after 1 a.m. now in the Boston area. I may be sleepless in Boston right now, but at the moment, when I was there in San Francisco, it felt to me like things were clueless in San Francisco. So you see me on the right. Up until about a week or so ago, I didn't see people on the streets here in the Boston area with masks on. People are getting more serious, but we've been a bit behind the 8 ball in how we have addressed this crisis with some fairly serious ramifications. Okay, let's look at some data. What this shows, you see the gold line there where the infections went way up in China, but then they leveled off as they closed things down. The rest of the world it's really skyrocketed. And then if we look in greater detail, if you look at this line on the left here with Hubei, China, you see that the infections really rocketed upward there. But the interesting thing, look at this red line, that's the rest of China. So as China locked down Wuhan and Hubei and so forth, they really prevented the rest of China from getting infected. If we look at the gold line, this is developing Asia. So that's Singapore, Hong Kong, South Korea, Japan, and Taiwan. You see that it didn't rocket up as much. So these are areas where we can look to as for examples of how the situation was brought under reasonable control relatively quickly. If we look at this blue line, you can see it just skyrocketing in Europe. Now these data were as of middle of March, so the black line for the US hadn't started to go up, but obviously it has just exploded here over the last few weeks. Why did Asia do so much? Has Asia done so much better than Europe and the United States? Partly because prior experience with SARS. You know, they had already, Singapore, the master planners there, they had already stocked up long, just in anticipation that there would be another epidemic, stocked up on masks and so forth. Cultural differences are a big factor here. Big concerns about privacy and so forth in the US and Europe makes it difficult to use some of the techniques that have been used in Asia. Different political structures, not as able to mandate that citizens do certain things, and testing capabilities have been on the short side in a lot of countries, including here in the United States. what has worked is pretty well known. You start down there at the bottom there with social distancing, banning gatherings of a certain size, definitely the temperature checkpoints. My goodness, the Philippines has had that for months now. The aggressive testing is really key, really key. And Attorney Lim talked a little bit about some of the discussions you're having there about testing in the Philippines. That's really key to getting this under control. Contact tracing, tracing those with whom somebody who is diagnosed as having the virus, who they may have come in contact with. 14-day quarantine of arrivals. I mentioned I got there in San Francisco. I put myself on quarantine, not because the United States government told me to, because I didn't want to infect my family. But that's a key. There I was coming from a high infection country and not told to go on quarantine. That's a must. Then in parts of Asia, there have been mobile phone and TV tracking, and then isolation, household quarantine. So Asian countries done digital tracking of those who've traveled outside of the country, risk of infection based on where they've been, the flights they've taken, and then people quarantined at home. You see that on the lower left. US still coming up the curves there, but Taiwan, China, South Korea definitely on the upper part of that curve. And the results speak for themselves. You saw that line there, the gold line on the prior chart, with how effectively they've brought things under control. A little bit more about Taiwan's approach, digitized tracking of everybody's travel history. Each arriving traveler electronically tagged for risk of infection based on flight origin and travel history. People with low risk of infection got a little bit of an easier pass through immigration, but those with higher risk quarantined at home, and then their movements tracked via mobile phone. I got to tell you, on the other earlier chart, I said there were cultural differences. Be tough to get Americans to agree to do something like that, but very effective in Taiwan for helping to bring things under control there. They've also done proactive testing. They got a national health database, and they identified people who already had severe respiratory problems, and those who had previously tested negative for influenza were retested for COVID-19. So Taiwan really got on top of this. I indicated earlier when I talked about Admiral Stockdale that part of the way to get through, the mindset to get through this is to be brutally honest. And we need to be brutally honest with ourselves that this is not going to be a one and done. That pandemics, this is again, something we learned from the 1918 pandemic, is there tend to be successive waves. So in other words, the infection rate goes down, but then there is a second wave of infections at a lower level, fortunately, but a second wave. And we're already seeing that in Singapore, perhaps in China. Singapore started to allow its citizens who had been abroad to return. And when that happened, they started to see a bit of a second wave there. So we just have to anticipate that for the Philippines. It's just part of the brutal honesty. And again, we're hoping that wave will be lower. It has been as we've in other areas. So we're hoping that second wave will be much lower in the Philippines also. How do pandemics end? Well, the virus could mutate and no longer be deadly. Probably best not to put our hopes on that. A vaccine could be developed, and Johnson & Johnson, for example, is indicating that it is reasonably optimistic that it has created a vaccine. The testing is going to start in a few months, and so we're hopeful that, and there are a number of other pharmaceutical and biotech firms who are developing vaccines, so we're hopeful that something will be developed. Really, full return to normal may not be possible until we have an effective vaccine. That's not, we'd like to be able to kind of snap our fingers and have that available immediately, but think about this. The people who are most vulnerable in this situation are people over the age of 60. So to get a vaccine for them, you may have to amp up the vaccine a bit. Then you have to think about safety for people like pregnant women and so forth. So it can be a bit tricky to, just in terms of the science to come up with the right formula there. And then, I mean, you're gonna have to have a vaccine for about 7 billion people. It's a massive, massive production and logistics issue there. It's realistically a year away. I had if feasible there because viruses are notoriously difficult to develop vaccines for, but we'll remain hopeful in this case. And we have to recognize the vaccine's not going to help those who are already infected. Now, what about effective treatments? Well, a lot of work going on. 20 promising therapeutic compounds are currently being assessed. So these are things, if you've already got it, they'll hopefully keep you alive and will lower the severity of the experience with the virus, but evidently a lot of good work going on there. So again, hope for the future, but let's act on the reality of today. All right, part 3 of assessing the situation, economics. A picture is emerging here, and it looks like Asia is going to rebound first. The question is, particularly for export-oriented countries in Asia, who are you going to sell to? If the U.S., and we're going to get to that in a minute, and we're dropping pretty deeply here in economic activity here. Same is true for Europe. Who's Asia going to sell to? But part of this is a message of hope for the Philippines. Your neighbors are starting to rebound, and I think that holds out some hope for you, particularly for the degree to which the Philippines exports to other Asian countries. As I said, wow, big economic contraction in the US and Europe. 20 to 25% of the US economy is in the equivalent of a medically induced coma. You know, sometimes physicians will induce a coma to treat a particular disease, and that's effectively what's happened in the US. That metaphor of a medically induced coma comes by way of Professor Paul Krugman of Princeton University. Unemployment, oh my goodness, in the United States already at depression levels. We've had 18 million people sign up for unemployment benefits just in the last 3 weeks. So we've got, say, roughly about 14% of the working population already unemployed, and it could go considerably higher. Can't count the US out. We're a highly resilient country. My favorite quote comes from Warren Buffett, the investor, who has said the worst wager, the worst bet you can make, ever since 1776, the worst bet you can make would be to bet against the United States. We always seem to come back. We're still a resilient country. The stimulus bill, which really is a disaster relief bill, combined with what the Federal Reserve is doing, we are pumping this economy with gazillions of dollars. About probably over 4 trillion is going to be pumped into the economy. That's going to help. 3/4 of the U.S. workforce is still going to have jobs and money, and there definitely is pent up demand. The discussion at the Easter dinner table among the women was the desire to go back to the nail salon, and there's one in the Boston area that has already taken reservations, and they're booked up months in advance. So there's pent up demand in a number of areas. The recovery is likely to be slow. The Philippine economy, we'll get to that in a minute, may flatline, but is not likely to decline. As I mentioned that first slide with the map of the world, other emerging markets, Africa, Latin America, et cetera, they may suffer a lot. Okay, China taking advantage of the situation, playing the big brother role, bringing medical equipment and supplies to countries like Spain and Italy. They're going to have a problem in the intermediate term because it sells to the rest of the world. There's a possible reversal of the trend, and I put trend in italics. The reversal of the trend towards greater globalization could slow it down. for the intermediate future to make too much dependence on globalization, but that could definitely start to slow down a bit. People are going to review supply chains, maybe bring them closer to their home markets. Emphasis in the US on bringing manufacturing back to the US. And like I said, big challenge if this pandemic spreads to Africa and Latin America. Here is some data comparing the decline currently, that's in blue, with the decline at the time of the global financial crisis. And you can see the blue bars are all lower than the red bars. And you can see there in the very middle that the biggest dip there was Spain, Italy taking a big dip, UK. And by the way, this is just for the first quarter. The second quarter of this year is going to be, could be even an even steeper decline. And you see in the first quarter, even China down by 10%, and the overall European area down close to 15%. Okay, in this chart, let's start with China, which is about 2/3 of the way down. If you look at that, in China in 2019 their GDP grew at 6.1%. It's projected to grow at 1.2% this year, and then back up to its historical level, 6.2% in 2021. Now, compare that with Japan, projected to go down by 4.8% in this year and up by 4% in 2021. India, kind of similar to China, not a recession, but and a big uptick in 2021. Let's compare those numbers with the US. Projected to go down by 6.4% in this year, up by 4.5% in following year. And as you look at the European countries, you see a similar situation to the US. The decline this year is projected to be greater than the rebound in 2021.
Tully,
yes,
sorry,
yes.
can I just let you know that there's like 5 minutes to go on the presentation.
Great, thanks for the reminder, Maria. Appreciate it. Okay.
Thanks.
U.S. unemployment rate could really skyrocket here. Germany doing something very intelligent, allowing firms to reduce hours and pay without laying them off. What this is going to mean is that they can ramp up quickly once the economy returns. I'm sure you're seeing something very similar to what we're seeing in the US. The industries that are way down are travel, shopping, transportation, restaurants, and so forth. Groceries, big bump up as people stockpile, going back down to normal. So what's going to happen? The crisis likely to be an accelerant. Brands are going to be amplified for better or for worse. Companies like Hilton Hotels, finding jobs for their employees, great branding for Hilton. Allstate giving rebates to people because they aren't driving as much, great for a brand like Allstate. Digitization probably will accelerate in the areas that are appearing on your screen there, at least in the US. Be interested to hear what you think about the Philippines. Proximity, production closer to demand could be pretty big. Globalization will slow down. If that happens, global economic growth will also probably slow down. In this slide, what this really says, if you look at the middle, is that the jagged lines are the stock market. The stock market's going to go up before the worst is over. So this was our savings and loan crisis in the US. Cumulative bank failures kept going up, but the stock market looks forward. So as we see positive signs in the stock market, that doesn't mean that the worst is over. Okay, what's the economic recovery going to be like? The V is sharp down, sharp back up. The U is sharp down, a little slower back up. The W, double dip recession. L is depression. I put my bet 2 weeks ago on a webinar I gave on this, moderate U-shaped recession, and one person chatted in, oh, you're optimistic. I get to think about it, probably right. Again, Professor Krugman had said we're likely to see more of the Nike swoosh return, which is, if you look at it, it's a more gradual return to economic health than the U is. Again, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, so best to think about what the different possibilities are. Best case, miracles happen, doubt it. Worst case is really gloomy, and let's hope that does not happen. The worst case being a global economic depression. We're going to, by best guess, we're going to recover, not as fast as we'd like to. Asia ahead of the US and Europe. As I said, there are going to be second waves of infections, suppressed economic activity. Already mentioned the importance of getting on top of the pandemic. And the longer this crisis drags on, the bigger and more permanent the changes will be. I'm an amateur a student of history. Boy, if you study it, it's just amazing how resilient mankind is. Again, we're going to get through this and go forward. All right, in terms of your own companies, pretty key slide here. Recessions shuffle the deck more than boom times do. The changes are bigger. They show up more. Tend to show up early, and gains and losses tend to endure. Myth: downturns are when companies fail. No, it tends to be after the downturn because companies haven't been planning adequately and positioning themselves for growth. This is all a part of the zoom in and zoom out that I was talking about earlier. So a lot of companies are definitely in survival. If that's where you are, that's got to be your priority. But to the extent you have some resiliency in your business, position your company for the long-term growth. Now I go back to the military analogy. My nephew is in the US Army. I asked him, what do they tell you about being in a battlefront situation? The 4 F's: find, flank, fix, and finish. What we need to find is cash. Cash is no longer king. Apologies if this offends any people who are religious. I pray every day, and I've doubled down on my prayer in this situation, but cash is certainly of heightened importance. If you look at cash, here are not the areas that need to be looked at. And just going back to what I thought I was hearing about Ayala Corporation here, accounts payable, extend payables, intelligent, don't kill your suppliers. Sounds like that's what they're doing. These slides will be available, so I won't go into greater detail about this right now. Here's where the opportunities are. Downturns present strategic opportunities, and the best companies do more than survive. People are going to be making bets on the future, and those who take a long-term perspective are likely to be the big winners out of this. Talked about communications. It's got to be a combination of empathy and candor. You know, like the Germans, look before you lay off, because when things come back, you're going to need people who've got the experience and expertise to pull your company out of it. A potential example of a company that's getting on top of the crisis, maintaining forward momentum is Samsung. Operations in China were suspended or reduced, and so they moved manufacturing of their high-end models of smartphones to Vietnam. They kept Korean plants on standby. And look at this, provided $1.2 billion in loans and fast payments to stabilize their ecosystem partners. At this juncture, Samsung looked pretty smart. Okay, implications for the Philippines, low levels of testing. And so what this does is skews the data, particularly the death rate. As I said in an earlier slide, it's really ought to be about 1%. So if it's looking at 4.7% as of April 5th, that's an indication the testing has not been as extensive as it ought to be. Things ought to improve, a lot more test kits coming in, labs going up, et cetera. So hopefully that will be taken care of. Health system under some strain. So I thought what Dr. Salvana said sounded absolutely right. The Philippines cannot afford a full-blown Wuhan, Italy, South Korea. And I think the Philippines, again, sign of hope, tough situation right now, but seems to be like a lot of things are being done right there. The death rate in the Philippines has been going down, could be another hopeful sign for the country. Economists, they seem to be as confused as the rest of us. Here are their projections for growth. Nice optimistic one from Banco Central, 5 to 5.5%, S&P 4.2%, Capital Ec under 1%, Asian Development Bank a decline. Pick your number. Now, this chart. The blue circles are the degree of healthcare preparedness. And then on the vertical axis here, we have economic vulnerability and and we have capacity on the lower axis. If you look at the Philippines, look, it's not in that pink area there in the lower left-hand corner. That's good. Small blue dot, healthcare preparedness capabilities, maybe not as great as we'd like them to be, but look at who major economic partners are. They tend to be in the upper right. So going forward is the Philippines should be in, might be in reasonable shape. Here you can see that GDP estimates put the Philippines pretty similar to its Southeast Asian neighbors. Okay, virus needs to be under control. I think all of you are discussing that in your deliberations there at MAP. Some takeaways. Best guess, global crisis starts to ease in the next few months, but it's going to be 18 months of on again, off again crisis as those second waves come through. Global recession are going to be deep in the US and Europe, but could be short, could be that Nike swoosh. Again, selected Asian countries recovering faster than the rest of the world, but who are they going to sell to? You know, you may avoid a recession in the Philippines. Count your blessings if you do. All right. Philippines could come out of this crisis in better shape than a lot of other developing countries. Got to get the infections under control, greater testing, etc. You know well these challenges here, but hopefully they're going to be opportunities. Could they be in the recovering parts of Asia? Could they be in domestic travel? And so forth. All right, final word to all of you. Take care of yourself. You are critical to your family, your team, and your company. You know, the anxiety, this tough problem solving are exhausting. So give yourself a sanctuary every once in a while, permission to do things that rejuvenate you. As I said, scarcest resources are leaders' attention, energy. Preserve yours. Okay, yeah, this is going to be a marathon. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon. That's just the brutal reality. Hold your core values. These may or may not be yours. A family certainly was. That's a predominant value in the Philippines, as is prayer, gratitude, compassion, whatever yours are. Be rooted in the deeply grounded in those as you go forward. And Maria, this is my last slide. If we can help, let us know. We're going to be putting a lot of videos and articles and so forth on our website that address this. So we're going to try and help in every way we can. All right.
Okay.
Maria, over to you.
I've got Arnold breathing on my neck and just saying, okay, we were ready, 5 minutes more to go. Okay, thank you so much, very much, Tully. Okay, now let's get this conversation going. Let me just kind of introduce to you how this conversation also with Francis came about. He asked me, when he asked me to be the moderator for this session, I asked him who A, the panelists were, and B, I said, why did you choose this four to take part in this discussion? And he said he really wanted to have people who are representative of the industry that they represent, so that we can get a wide point of view of what was going on in the Philippines. So let me introduce to you the panelists. I'm going to be short and brief, just so that we can go straight into the panel discussions and get something more kind of lively going. So who are the people who are with us today? The first is Mario Jordan Magellan FETALINO. He is the co-founder and CEO of Acudeen Technologies, and he will be the voice of the SMEs. The second panelist we have today is Mr. IRWIN LEE. He's the president and CEO of Universal Robina Corporation, one of the largest branded consumer food and beverage companies in the Philippines, and therefore he'll be representing the food and beverage industry. Our third panelist is Mr. Arthur Tan, who's the CEO of Integrated Microelectronics Incorporated. He will be representing technology, electronics, as well as the export industry. Our fourth and final panelist is Mr. NESTOR Tan, who's the president and CEO of BDO Unibank, one of the largest banks in the Philippines, rather. And he was the management man of the year. Now, before I start the discussion, let me just kind of give contextual, just to add to Tully. Thank you very much, by the way, for your presentation. Before we start the discussion, I want to just highlight an interview that was given by the US, the top immunologist in the US, Dr. Anthony Fauci, when he was describing the COVID-19 virus. What did he say were characteristics of this? He said the issue of it is its efficiency and its transmissibility. He also said that the characteristic of virus is that it stays silent. The virus, he says, will not disappear. And finally, when he was asked, how long will this virus crisis last? And his answer was interesting. He said, the virus determines the timeline, not us. We manage and formulate a timeline depending on how successful we have in containing the virus and what patterns and dynamics of the virus. Without hesitation, you evaluate as time goes on. And on that note, let me start the discussion. Just wanted to check that all the panelists are with us. Arnold, I'm not hearing anybody.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Okay, right.
I'm here.
Okay.
Hello.
So right. So we've got all four, right? Because I don't see Magellan in my panel. I only see.
Yes,
I'm here, Maria. Hi.
You're there. Great. Okay. Right. So the first question I'd like to ask is this. Looking at the past month, if I were to ask you to describe what it has been like for you, and I wanted you to say, use just one word to describe what it's been like for the past month, what would it be? What would be that one word? Let me just go through everybody first. Let's talk to IRWIN. IRWIN, what would be the word that would come to mind if I were to ask you to describe what has the past month been for you?
For me, it's been frenetic.
Frenetic, okay. Nestor?
Roller coaster.
Okay. Magellan?
Painful.
Okay. Arthur? Art?
Art, I think, has lagged out.
Okay.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So, all right. So there's frenetic. Sorry, can I just go back again? So frenetic, and then what else were the other words?
Painful.
Painful.
Roller coaster.
Okay. So let's, why? Let's start with you first, Nestor. Why did you choose that
Well,
word?
I think you don't know what to expect. During the first month and up to where we are now, we've been holding management meetings almost twice a day because we take it by the hour. There are things developing as we speak, so we need to touch base with each other first thing in the morning to see what happened overnight, and to touch base with each other before we end the day to see what happened during the day. And I think the factors that are affecting our operations is not solely what we see from the outside, but also similar to 2008, what's going on in other areas that's also affecting policymakers' decisions.
Okay. How about you, Erwin?
Well, frenetic because, well, like Nestor, I guess I'm lucky we're in an industry that is still operating. We're not in travel or hotels. We're in the food industry. And so we are one of those that should be allowed to continue to supply food and drinks to the general public. But it's been very frenetic because of the way the lockdown and the quarantine has been put in place. The communication between the national government and the LGUs have not always been seamless. So we it's really, the first thing that's really hit us in the first 2 weeks of this was the supply chain issues that we've had to dealt with. So that's quite frenetic because we're supposed to supply food, but there's no public transport. So how do you get the workers into the factories? Then we become a school bus service, and then we go out and put shuttle buses out, and then you have to deal with checkpoints. Then you deal with certain LGUs making their own lockdown decisions. So we've experienced a lot of manpower, materials, services shortages, issues with our suppliers not being able to deliver certain things, finding alternative materials. So all of that, right? So all of that has to be dealt with from a supply standpoint. And then from a demand standpoint, very quickly, within 2 to 3 weeks, you see the change in consumer habits. We've looked at what's happened in China. We've looked at what's happened in Korea, Taiwan, Hong Kong, Singapore, and we're following the same pattern, right? So we do make instant noodles with Nissin and Payless. We do sell instant coffee with great taste, and those demand curves have just shot up. But when overnight people want twice the number of instant noodles, that's what they did just a week ago. It's very difficult to deal with that. So we're doing the best we can. Equally, you've got some demand shifts, right? You shut down all of the malls and a lot of the out of home consumption and impulse categories. So unfortunately, we sell ready to drink beverages, we sell some chocolates and candies. And of course, when things are closed, then you don't have that demand, well, at least majority of the demand that are out of home and impulse, then you lose all of that. So you just have to deal with those kind of shifts very quickly. And most important, we've had to first deal with our own people. Are people safe? How do we level up our hygiene protocols, our safety protocols? We already exercise GMPs, good manufacturing practices, good warehousing practices. You just have to amp them up further, give more PPE, more sanitation. And because of the lockdowns, we've had to do a lot more lodging and accommodations as well, and do it in a social distancing kind of way. So all of these in a span of a few weeks, and that's before we get into recovery planning and things like that.
So how did you manage to get the supply side going? How did you determine who goes to work, and how was that decision-making process? Share us your experience in that.
Well, so a bit like what Nestor says, I guess we have a 9 a.m. call every day. And this is all just comes together. We looked at the most important things to deal with. Once we've dealt with our people, then we deal with our operations, and things evolve. You very quickly see in a few days where the spikes are happening, where the shortages are happening, and you have to sort of adjust that. In terms of how we work, just like many companies, I would imagine, for those that can work remotely, you work from home. But there are operations where you cannot work from home. A factory cannot be a work from home situation. If you want to produce the food is produced in factories. And so we have a work from site operations. We take care of the people who work from site.
Yes. So did provide living accommodations within the factories, or how
you can't really provide lodging for all. So you try to provide as much as you can. Had the checkpoints and the public transport been more accommodating, we should not have had to, but we've had to lease more shuttle buses. We are picking up people, but even in an attempt to do that, it's not always easy, right? Because there are people who live in the inner barangay, so they may not be able to get to the pickup point. So that's kind of what we've had to do. We've had to designate people who have to work from site. We try to provide as much as we can, all of the amenities, all the necessities, all of the allowances that will be needed, free meal, all of those, so that people feel safe, that they can come to work, and that perhaps the workplace might be safer than their very crammed home. So that's kind of what we've tried to do. But I have to say that we're not at the level of attendance and manning and crewing of operations to be able to fulfill all of the orders that are coming in.
Okay, so I see that Art has returned to us. Art, what I wanted to ask before I hand over to Magellan is I had asked the panelists, if I were to ask you to describe what the past month has been for you, and I want you to just use one word, what was it? What would be that word to describe what it's been like for you the last month? What is that word?
Amazing.
That sounds very positive. Share with us why you chose that word.
It's amazing because it's a testament to the value proposition of what the Philippines are, our culture. Because as what everyone was saying, we're in the manufacturing space, and so we'll have to don't have the option of working from home. The equipments, the very specialized machines, and the type of product that we build are actually part of a global supply chain. So when we stop, there are other of the world economy that stops because we were lucky enough to be part of that global supply chain and at the same time be sole sourced. And I think this is the part that seems to be amiss in our overall strategy as a country. I understand the focus that everybody has in being able to put into the needs of our current supply chain, but we also have to understand that there are certain parts of the industry that affects the rest of the world. And part of that is essentials. As you know, these PPEs that everybody is looking for, there's only a handful of machines that actually produces these PPEs at the quality level that is necessary in the developed world. And most of those machines are dependent on the electronic components that are actually being produced by IMI. And so that part is the challenge. And so the way that we've been able to get around that was to ask for volunteers from our workforce who was willing to live inside the factory. So we had to convert all the different spaces that we have in the factory, and we're able to now have the ability to house and maintain about 1,000 operators. Mind you, our run rate is about 6,000 operators, and we're only able to house 1,000. So that's the level of production that we have to now just manage internally. And so we house them for 2 weeks, and we quarantine them, we put them on shifts, they're on teams, they're all arm bonded, so we don't mix the different teams, so we can then contact trace if there was any issues with any of them. And then we provide all the other amenities the same way that IRWIN does, except that we don't shuttle them because we just don't want to add the risk of bringing in any more contaminants inside the factory. So
are you also involved in the testing kits, in producing the testing kits? No.
We're involved in producing the testing kits, but the testing we produce are those that are being used by the research lab in being able to come up with a genome for the virus, for the antigen. So those are the parts that we produce.
Okay, interesting. Okay, by the way, I invite the panelists also to ask questions if you have any questions, okay? Now, Magellan, let's go to Magellan. Is he with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Hi, Magellan.
Hi,
So, remind us your word again and why did you choose that?
I chose painful because we're one of the 100,000 small businesses in the country, and it's because contrary to large companies, the runway of small businesses would average at about 3 months at best. So when the lockdown happened, it was sudden. Like it only took 2 days for the government to move from like a partial lockdown to like an expanded lockdown, limiting everything we could do. So because of that, we have to be fast in making a decision on how to extend a runway, which means making pay cuts for employees. We had to like furlough a number of employees, and also we had to renegotiate with suppliers. So all of this we had to do in a very fast manner. So the time to think and decide, sometimes you will really have gaps in your decision making, but you have to do it fast, because if you don't do it fast, then everything gets affected. And like a few days could like impact 1 month or 2 months worth of runway for you in the survival of your company. And I guess I'm speaking on behalf of most small businesses in the country who's going through a similar experience.
So you're in the business actually of selling that, correct?
We're in the tech business. We facilitate and provide a platform for factoring. Yes.
Because I'm just curious whether you have had a lot of people knocking on your door as a result of what's happened in the last month.
I guess that's a natural reaction from businesses. Obviously, there's a demand for credit, especially with the small businesses. But the problem is the other side of things, the availability of lending cash or money. A lot of sources that we typically had dried up in the first few weeks of the lockdown. So a lot of funders actually are on a wait and see mode right now as the lockdown continues.
So Nestor, let me then go back to you and then ask you the topic that everybody was talking about. So one of the things that I've been doing actually for the past 2 weeks is trawling through all the Viber messages, all the Viber conversations in the MAP COVID group. And one of the things that always came up in conversation was this issue of debt forgiveness. Could you share with us your thoughts on it? And then I want you to react to what he says, by the way, Magellan. Okay, go on, Esther.
Okay. I think I'd like to give a little bit of background, and it's forgiveness is probably not the right word. Let me start with the basic principle that we hold a fiduciary responsibility to take care of your deposits. So if somebody says, are you willing to forgive debt? My retort would be, are you the first one to give up a portion of your deposits? And obviously the answer mostly would be no. So forgiveness may not be the right term, but probably restructuring. At a time like this, I think as what Magellan has said, the problem is actually tiding you over during this time where you don't receive revenues from your business. So it's a cash flow problem. Banks have always been there to restructure. We've gone through 97, we've gone through 2008. And we've always been able to recover with the economy. I mean, we have been able to support the economy for it to recover, as well as banks that had problems have been able to recover as a result of that. So the first question is, are banks willing to forgive debt? I think that's not the right term. The right term is, are banks going to be more understanding to make sure that the companies that can actually recover are helped accordingly so that they can recover at the appropriate time? And the answer to that is definitely yes, because we're not business. We are jointly together in this, because if you are not able to recover, then we also have a problem. So it's up to us to help all types of businesses, not only small businesses. That's the first point. Now, going back to Magellan's comment, a lot of people loosely use the term banks and SMEs, as if there's only one bank and there's only one type of SMEs. The relationship is actually multiple banks and multiple SMEs. And it's actually a relationship of one of mutual trust and belief in the business case. So what may work for one SME may not work for another, because the business case is different. What may work for one bank may not work for another, because bank situations and expertise are actually different. So to generalize, to say banks are not supporting us because they're not lending to me, an SME, is probably a stretch. And let me just highlight that there are almost 40 commercial banks, close to 50 savings banks, and over 400 rural banks. And to generalize that there's only one type of bank may be a stretch. So if SMEs are saying banks are not supporting us, it's probably unfair to say all banks are not supporting SMEs. Maybe they've had an experience wherein their bank is not supporting them. By the same token, when a bank supports an SME, they support the SME that is their client, the one that they understand. So they cannot blindly say, I will support everybody. And that's the situation we are in.
Okay. Does that fill you with hope, Magellan? That answer. So essentially, he's saying, there is a selective approval of the SMEs.
Maybe.
Is that correct? Is that correct for me to
Well,
say?
Maria, the selective, it has a negative connotation.
Okay.
Actually, any customer and any bank will have to develop that relationship over time, and it's regardless of size. Okay? So if you haven't developed that relationship with one specific bank, it's probably a stretch to say that at this time they will automatically support you. Some may, but generally it doesn't happen that way, because we tend to develop that trust. And one of the things that we look at is a track record. So selective appears
Maybe the wrong choice of words. Maybe,
yeah, it's not the right term.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So Magellan, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree actually with Boss Nestor. That's true. In fact, I don't really think that it's the banks. It's not really a problem with the banks, but I guess it's a problem of the situation right now, wherein you have majority of small businesses who did not really foresee, because not all small businesses have the capacity to actually come up with a business continuity plan during a time like this. So not everyone was prepared with their cash flows in general. I think the problem here is the situation wherein we're already here. You have a lot of SMEs who are underbanked and does not have the relationship, a strong relationship with banks. In fact, if you go and avail a typical loan from any bank or any financing company, it would take 3 to 12 months timeline-wise, especially if you're still building up that relationship with your bank. So that kind of timeline structure versus the situation now where there you have a vulnerable segment of about 1 million micro to small SMEs who might die in the next few months. That's the problem, and I think that's where the government support would really help bridge that through in one way or another. Maybe sovereign guarantee that they can provide for banks to make a number of banks more comfortable with providing loans to SMEs, or course it via government agencies. So I don't think that the banks are the problem. It's the situation where a lot of SMEs don't have business continuity plans, the lack of sophistication to plan for something like this, and not having that relationship needed to avail the loans they need during a time like this.
Okay, now let's. We'll probably just go back again to this situation with the SMEs as we tackle the other topics that we're going to do in the next hour or so. Magellan, do you still want to have a presentation of some sort about SMEs and the plight, or do you want to just have continue the discussion? You wanted to put the case of the SMEs forward at some point, according to Arnold, or
I guess I can just read the summary. We did an extensive survey. In the last week, we had 200 over a sample of respondents from at least 3 sectors. These are retailers, wholesale, services sector, and a number of small manufacturers. They're just saying that 88% of them stopped operations during the lockdown. And again, their major concern is cash flows, specifically for their suppliers, payment of salaries for their employees. In fact, a number of the companies we talked to said they still have, when they applied for the camp program of Dole in the early weeks of the quarantine, which was supposed to give at least 5,000 to around 5,000 pesos per employee for these for companies who were affected by the lockdown, they still haven't received this up to today. And of course, the worry of revenue losses. A lot of them had to adjust their projections for the year, wiping out their revenues for the next few months. And then, as mentioned a while ago, a lot of them are underbanked. 63% don't have access to bank lines. And then 68% said their revenue projections for this year, 75% are potentially wiped out on average. And a lot of them, in terms of sentiment, are saying not confident that they could survive. 54% said they are not confident they would survive if the lockdown extends to May.
Okay.
So these are just like facts we wanted to share with.
What the industries that these respondents belong to? What are they?
A lot of them are doing retail. In fact, they're number 1, retail and wholesale traders. Number 2 sector are in the services. A number are in marketing, advertising, food services.
Okay.
That's the bulk of the respondents.
Okay. Now, I've got other more follow-up questions, but I'm just conscious of time. So I'll just go on and do the second question. And then as I said, if you have time on our hands, we'll just go back to your survey. Can I ask the group, what are your plans when the lockdown eases or between now and say at the end of April 30? I'm curious to know operationally as well as strategically, what are your plans? Maybe I could ask Erwin first.
Just unmute myself. Okay. The Luzon-wide lockdown happened on the 17th of March. Universal Robina has businesses in other countries as well, so we've had to deal with this question, first of all, in China, where we have a business, and then felt the impacts in Thailand and Vietnam as well.
Can I interrupt? What was your business in China? Is it the distributing food or manufacturing food, or?
We manufacture Jack and Jill potato chips in China, as well as some packaged cereal. So obviously, we got caught with that as early as January, February. And of course, this has come to the Philippine lockdown situation in the middle of March. So I just wanted to put the time frame to perspective. I think most of us, and I think most businesses, are in the throes of what I call phase one. In the first, let's say 4 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, obviously people will have their hands full on taking care of their people, getting the operational contingencies in place, protecting the balance sheet, shoring up cash, so on and so forth. I think we're right in the middle of moving from phase one to phase two. And phase two is that point where you plan for recovery. As Tully said earlier, we don't know when this will end. We don't know when it shall pass, but we know it will pass. We can debate the shapes, but what we're doing now is a range of scenarios, stress testing our plans for a range of scenarios. But also what we have decided to do was to not mortgage the future. We have not laid anyone off. We've kept everyone on the payroll. We have continued our innovation plan. We're a food and beverage company. And I think recovery will be in our hands. It will be the kind of innovation that we will bring to market, hopefully in the second half, and including looking at adjusting our plans towards next year. As you'll see from many conversations of any analysis, there will be a new normal, right? So the heightened, I think Tully mentioned some of them, heightened awareness for health and wellness trends, really driving more brand with purpose. So tailoring innovations, I think, towards that, right? Shopping habits will change, less frequency, bigger baskets, bigger sizes. So all of these, I think, will become important. Making sure our supply base is resilient. So my heart goes out to what Magellan was saying, because we have some SME suppliers. We want them to continue. I think they're equally disrupted by lockdowns, checkpoints, lack of supply, people and all of that. But we want them to continue because it is a chain, right? I mean, we buy cartons from some of them. We sell to retailers and wholesalers, and we need them to be healthy so that our credit and our receivables are collected. So we need everyone to sort of so we need to make sure that our recovery includes all of that. And last but not the least, I think the new normal is planning for making sure that what we have, what we're experiencing now, there's some good things we're experiencing now. Decisions are faster. We're more digital. I've been championing digital. I mean, I started my career in the Philippines, but spent 26 years outside of the Philippines, and then came back to signing piles of checks and tons of manual processes. And I think the last few weeks has just accelerated this move towards more automation, more digitization. So I think all of that, I think we should be part of a new normal planning.
Okay. Nestor, your turn. You're mute, sorry.
Okay, sorry about that. We go back to normal. Basically, I think I would echo Erwin's comment that there's going to be a new normal. But the biggest issue for us is actually how we are able to psychologically address the concerns of our staff. And we will have to adjust our working environment to see how we can maintain the due diligence that we've done today. Basically, social distancing. It's nice to say, nice to do, but it will take time before we're able to expand our capacity to be able to do social distancing. And of course, that includes a certain amount of cost. Work from home doesn't work for us. You can't have traders away. You can have people handling cash away from the office. They have to be here. So we have to address that. The big issue actually is how will customers react? Because we are a service industry and we are geared for people walking in the branches. Will they change their behavior? If they change their behavior, we will have to adjust how we service them. If they don't, we have no choice. We have to work as is. So I think we are actually moving to a digital process, but we believe it's years before we're able to get there. The COVID scare may have accelerated us a few steps, but it will revert back to the slow pace by which it's going, meaning you can't move faster than the market. So how are we preparing for it? We're preparing as if what we're having now will continue, but we have the luxury of moving back a little bit to where we were if our clients should prefer to do so. But the bigger issue for us is how we take care of our employees, because we are geared for pre-COVID, not post-COVID. And we can do some minor adjustments post-COVID, but the others will take longer to adjust.
Maria, you're on mute.
I can't hear you.
Okay, I do apologize for that. Accidentally pressed my
Yeah.
mute button. So what about bank opening hours? Because obviously, because of the strict lockdown, the lockdowns and the strict quarantines, you weren't able to open all your bank branches. How is that moving forward? How are you going to operate that? How are you going to do this now? I mean, you're going to open all your bank branches at some point, or is it a gradual thing?
There are two factors here. Number one is the availability of infrastructure. The one that's holding us back now is the same problem that other companies are having, public transportation. A big portion of our people are commuters. So we need to make sure we have that in place. The second thing is actually the people's safety. If we can guarantee people's safety, and that's a big if because it's not solely our control, then we will be in a position to get the people psychologically back to where they were, although it's going to be slow. Let me give you an example. We can protect our people's safety, or at least control it in our own environment. But if they commute and they live in a crowded space, we cannot control it. So the next day, these same people come to work. Are we able to protect their colleagues just in case they get infected? Now, that's going to be a psychological issue that will impact everybody for a period of time. It's not going to go away that easily. So to answer your question, yes, we will strive to maintain the services that we've had, but there is a hurdle psychologically with our staff to get over that. So that's the reason why, if you notice, the number of branch openings that we have actually varies daily, because we are not sure how many we can staff up on any given day.
Okay. One last thing before I move on to Art. The currencies, the banknotes.
Yes.
How do you handle them? Because you have to obviously disinfect. I mean, any payments that I make, any payments that I receive, they get disinfected thoroughly. How do you what process do you do in your banks for banknotes that you receive?
Well, it's mostly heat. because we do sort them and we package them, the heat that it undergoes supposed to take care of the virus, because the virus, as I understand it, cannot exist above a certain temperature.
I see. Okay, well, that's consoling to know. Then okay, because that was the thing that was I was quite intrigued about.
Well,
okay,
before it's packaged, though, there is a risk, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. So that how you protect your staff as well as your
Well,
patrons.
that's why our staff have to wear gloves and they have to wear protective
Okay.
equipment.
Okay, is Arnold around, by the way? Arnold, are you around? So we've got a little problem here because really we should just be ending this in 4 minutes. Do we end short at 2:30? We do, right? Yes? We end.
We can extend by 5 minutes if we need to extend.
Maria, Francis.
Yeah, Francis, yeah.
I think if we need to extend by 15 minutes, let's do it.
Okay, good.
The interchange, the insights are very good.
Okay, it's a shame to just kind of end it. I mean, it's like bitin, basically, if we just do it this way, right? So, okay, right. Okay, thank you. So we'll end at 2:45 for anybody who is planning anything for the rest of the afternoon. We'll try to end at 2:45, okay? And we're also looking at the questions. Unfortunately, we'll have to choose which of the questions we will use at a certain point. Okay, let's see first and see whether we can get this conversation going again. Let's go to Art. Art, what are your plans between now and the 30th? Also considering that you are helping the industry on providing the test kits and not providing the components as well as the other, you know, the PPEs and all that. Could you let us know what your plans are for the next weeks?
Well, the next couple of weeks is just an extension of where our operating procedures is where we are now. So as I mentioned earlier, we are operating in a workforce, primarily being able to continue to supply the critical essential components that is needed on a global basis. This is based on, most of it are basically telecom based and then medical based. And that we continue to support that. Currently, in order to alleviate the issues, exactly the same as NESTOR is saying, we've decided to house our operators in-house. And this is not just the operators, this is everybody. This is including security guards, the cafeteria, the janitorial services, everybody. And we provided lodging, food, shelter, medical support, and also financial support for all of them. And the challenge, as I said, and that we have is that even though we are able to provide that, is the volunteers. Because most of them also fear that they would be constrained in an environment that they could be contaminated. So we have to ensure that the place that they stay in are sanitized. I think one of the advantages that we have, because we're in the manufacturing space, is that the air quality and the control of temperature and control quality that we have inside the factory is actually even better than the one outside that everybody breathes from. And so that's the advantage that we have. So we have an environment that we can control. However, we're also limited because from now, and we extend this to the next 30 days, 15 days, is that what happens on a post scenario after this, the revenue is completely minimized because, as I said, be able to generate the kind of revenue that we were expecting, we needed to have around 6,000 employees, and we're only able to house about 1,000. And so that's one part. Then the rest of it is the rest of the industry. The automotive industry, they've already announced that they're going to start opening up their factories in different parts of the world. And so they're looking now of starting the supply chain back on track. Now, whether the Philippines will continue in this extended lockdown and to what level they will allow manufacturing to operate is going to have an effect, because the rest of the world is going to continue. And if we're not going to be part of that supply chain, it will find itself somewhere else. And this is what I think we have to be cognizant about as a government and as an economy, because it will not stop. And just to be mindful, I operate in 11 countries with about 21 different manufacturing factories. And in the other countries, I think the Philippines is the only one right now where the public transportation is completely locked down. All the other countries are also on a lockdown, but their public transportation are operating with very, very strict social distancing requirements and sanitation requirements for public. So all the manufacturing is also open. The only one that actually shut down on a lockdown similar to the Philippines right now is Mexico for me. But that's also being managed right now as to which part of the economy will be turned on. So I guess on a post-April 30 scenario, I think it's very, very realistic that if we were to continue, we should come out with a much more extensive testing mechanism for everyone, so that we can then contain the workforce necessary in order to support the economy, be it in SMEs or in large manufacturing areas. But the rest of the world are operating under that condition. They're coming into different cycles. Of course, the China factory, the ones that are out and running already, and they've already recovered. But the rest of the world are also going into its own cycles. So the Philippines will have to play along those cycles, and I just want to make sure that we continue to be relevant to the global supply chain. If not, then I think it's going to be affecting us on a long-term basis.
I have a question. You have an operation, quite a huge operation in China, correct?
Yes, 5 factories.
So then you've got the COVID from February, and then you've got the lockdown in Manila. So what are you doing to work around that so that it doesn't affect the business as much as it should? It's probably already affected, but I mean, how do you work around that situation?
Currently, the way I see it, I think China is the one that's going to come out of this, and as what Tully has already explained, China is the one that's going to come out of this cycle, to be the first one out of this cycle. And they've actually been very, very business and health conscious at the same time. So we all hear about the lockdown that they did. We all hear about the contact tracing that they've done 100%. And now that they're able to get out of that. On top of that, each of the factories that we have, that we continued to have the operators on standby, on forced leave, and coming up, the government compensated us for keeping those workers. I mean, one fact, I think, trade war, and because of the COVID, and because of the material and the amount of operators that we have in that one factory, the government paid us roughly close to $2 million as subsidy in order to keep the business operating in support for keeping those workers. Now, is that something I expect out of the Philippines? Probably not. We have our own set of problems. But I think the mindset of the government that looks at it not only from a health basis, but also from an economy basis, because they know they have to be able to support the people with an economy, I think that is important. And I think that's the part, if there's something that would be useful here in the Philippines, is that we don't have to go reinvent the wheel. Everybody is affected, just what Tully said. The whole world is affected. Each of these countries are dealing with it differently. And we can see where there is success and where there is none. So I think we can just easily figure out which ones would work with us and which ones won't. But constantly just giving away everything or asking private industry to support everything is not going to be sustainable. I mean, we all want to help, but if the idea that we're going to help to the level that there will be no more economy to come back to, I think that's false hope.
Right. So one more question. So at the time when the lockdown happened in China and your factories, I suppose, had closed down during that time, or how did you work?
Completely locked down. There's no operation.
So that's at some point, did you think to yourself and you know, should I be looking at other ways to produce these products and look at other, like maybe bringing them back to the Philippines rather than leaving them in China?
We
Or
did.
Yeah.
No, so what happened, the amount of businesses that we have that was China for China, those just stopped because there was no consumption that was being made in China. The products that we were supplying to the rest of the global supply chain that was produced in China was transferred in the Philippines, into Mexico, and into some parts of Europe and Bulgaria. So those are the three sites that actually got the benefit of it. So just mindful of that. Because of our lockdown, those that were transferred from China out to the Philippines are on their way back to China now.
See, okay. The irony of it all. Okay,
Yeah.
I have one question from the floor that I'd like to take up because it's now 2:36. Okay, the question is actually from ABS-CBN. To anyone from the panel, how can government and private sector partner to make sure MSMEs can survive this health crisis? How much are we looking at as a sort of rescue fund that struggling small enterprises can tap? I guess, Nestor, that's yours.
Let me start. I think you have to look at it from three perspectives. Number one is to make sure that there is low cost of financing for SMEs. Okay, and I think the BSP and certain policies have already worked in trying to lower intermediation costs, making sure that policy rates are down so that we can be more affordable to SMEs. That's the first one. The second has to do with making sure that the demand side remains strong. And when I say the demand side, I mean the economy generally remains strong. And it's not just SMEs. We have to understand that the SME is part of the multiplier effect. So if IRWIN, if ART starts to have good business, SMEs will be the beneficiary of that. So there has to be a strong policy on the demand side. And in my view, the best way to consider that from a government perspective is to try to spread the investment across a broader community. So if the government has build, maybe let's consider looking at PPPs or modified PPPs so that the private sector can pick up the slack in a lot of these things. The third has to do with the government's ability to help the SMEs. And let's face it, we are all in the same boat. The government doesn't print money that easily, and revenues are also affected because there are no tax collections. So the important thing is to we help each other so that the government can have the proper funding to be able to support the SMEs. So things like maybe advanced payment of taxes, maybe in the form of fundraising over the long term, that investors can invest in government securities that will have a holiday period so the government doesn't strain its resources. So there's a lot of ways that we can help the government. So I guess three things. Again, how do you spur demand across the board? And it's not just SMEs, because SMEs is part of an ecosystem. If large corporate doesn't have demand, SMEs will also suffer. The second is how you lower the cost of funding. And then the third is how we can help the government shore up its resources and its financing so that it has the funds to be able to help the SMEs.
Okay, right. One last question, I think. or maybe I've got another question, but anyway. So Joey Bermudez had said something about large companies are worrying about deep wounds. SMEs are worrying about survival.
Mhm.
My question is it all gloom? Is it all gloom in the future? Because really, I mean, I know it's like hardship times, okay, at the moment, but are there any kind of, is there a light at the end of a tunnel that we can all get excited about because of what's happening at the moment? From your perspective first.
Okay, I'm showing my age here. I'm showing my age here. I was part of the 1997 crisis. So I was already at BDO then, okay? I was part of the 2008 crisis. Now, the COVID crisis. And every time in the middle of it, we all feel the same way. And let's face it, there will be losers, but there will be survivors. And the good news is there will be more survivors than losers. Now, I'm not going to say or take lightly the losers, but that is the natural course of business and economy. The people who will lose out on this will be resilient enough to pick themselves up and move on. The big issue that we need to take care of really is that these businesses create jobs. So we need to find a way to make sure that the job creation remains strong and that we tide over the daily wage earners during this period. So I still believe that coming through the third crisis, we will survive and we will be resilient.
Okay, what about you, Magellan? What do you think? Is it all gloom and doom, or is it a land of opportunity for you?
Well, I agree with.
Or a time for opportunity, rather.
I agree with that. In fact, I think this is an opportunity. I've already seen a lot of businesses who innovated their way out of the issues they've encountered, businesses who pivoted, businesses who started to offer their products in a different way, or their services, added layers of services. So what the crisis brought upon to most businesses is the opportunity to innovate and really reevaluate as well. Innovate and reevaluate their current businesses and create better versions of it moving forward.
Okay, and what about you, Art?
Oh, totally positive because I'm very close to Nestor in age, and so
you survived 1997.
So I was there during times as well. But the one thing that is actually the opportunity there is each time you get this economic aberration is the level playing field changes. And once the level playing field changes, you get now an opportunity to either enter or exit a market that you would like to be. It also creates a time for driving innovation, as what was mentioned. You know, a lot of this, who would have thought that the level of digitization is now coming forth to us, that now a paperless society is something that we need. But it also brings out the challenges that our systems has brought into, right? Look at the country that we have right now, the issues that we're having in being able to manage this crisis, and that what comes out very pronounced is the lack of digitization that we have in this country. From the time that we have to go deal with goods and services and permits and everything else that has to go through, both on the commercial level and then on the government level, and we can't move one container van out of the port and it's been sitting there for months because everything is paperwork and nobody has shown up for work. See? So this presents now an opportunity to digitize everything. You know,
Right.
I remember the mayor of Taiwan when he wasn't the president yet. And Taiwan has the worst traffic problem. And he says in one fell swoop, he was able to clean up the traffic in Taiwan because did he build more roads? No. Did he put a coding system for the cars? No. He just made sure that every single thing that you had to do with the government was digitized. That you don't have to leave the house in order to do something with the government. And with that, a third of the traffic problem in Taiwan was gone. And so this is the opportunity that we have now is to start putting in and resetting the infrastructure that we have so that we can compete in this new norm that's going to happen. Because if we don't, I'm telling you, the new norm is going to leave us because that is where everybody is going to be.
Okay. Now, I'm sorry, Erwin, I'll have to ask you to be the last one and you have to be brief. Thank you very much for that, Art. Okay, Erwin.
Yeah, I think there is cause for optimism. I won't repeat all the points that the other three have mentioned. But the only one I'd mention is the cause for optimism is our people. I mean, remember and just imagine every day we're dealing with this and the amount of creativity, tenacity, resilience, and what our people come up with. We are spokespeople for them. We are giving you stories and answers that our organization, our people have really delivered over this last few weeks, and they're churning out lots of ideas for what is to come. So my optimism and my hope really is anchored on what I see, people rising to the occasion, and I think that will continue. And with them, I think we will be able to touch on all of the points that have been raised earlier, and they will bring us into the new normal, and then we'll find a new way of doing business and collaborating with government and all of those. But I think that's what we have to look forward to. And I think Tully asked us to take care of ourselves. I think we should be taking care of our people, and I think they'll make the future worthwhile.
Okay, so I'm not going to ask you anymore for your closing statements, but I just wanted our panel discussion to end up with something positive because it's been quite a sad 1 month. Okay, so thank you very much for taking part in the session. I would like to quote something that Winston Churchill said at a crucial juncture in World War II that was used quite a lot yesterday. He said, "This is not the end. It's not even the beginning of the end, but it is perhaps the end of the beginning." How appropriate for the times we are in. We hope we can all weather this storm, and this panel discussion has provided you with useful insights to help you ride the trade winds ahead and help you navigate your companies through this COVID crisis successfully, triumphantly. Thank you so much for joining the first online AGM session today of MAP. And I hope that you can be joining again the future sessions that MAP will be organizing to help everybody tide over the difficulties of COVID. Thank you very much and goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Much.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Francis, I'm sorry, I should have asked you to say something, but it's 2:45.
No problem. No problem.
Okay.
I wanted to thank the panelists, Tully, and you, of course, Maria, and members for participating. I hope everybody learned a lot. The insights are really very good, and I think there are a lot of takeaways from the session. Thank you very much, and stay safe.
I should have asked Tully to say something. Tully just disappeared from my screen, so I thought he fell asleep already. Because
Okay.
of the, sorry, thank you. Thank you very much, Tully. I'm sorry, I should have asked you to say something as well, but okay. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tully.
Thank you.
Oh, thank
Thanks,
you,
Tully.
Francis. Yeah, my pleasure.